Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Birch, and this podcast, it exists for you. Whether you're a music lover, an educator, a choir member, each week we bring guests to the show to help explore what matters in music. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to the show.
Hello, and welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. My name is Alex Gardner, the amazing co-host to the ever-lovely Dr. Emily Williams Birch. Hey, Emmy. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Alex. Thanks for coming back. I can't believe we wrote a book, and I'm holding it in my hands.
I know. It's so incredible. I'm just overwhelmed. Just the response so far has been overwhelmingly positive, and just having it tangible is just, it's amazing.
I really like the font.
Yes, the font is incredible. The little things matter.
The little things matter. And it's not a hard copy. It's not a hardback. So it's not too heavy. And the price point's fabulous. Anyway, we'll put all the details of how you can get your hands on one of these books. But today, in this episode, we're talking specifically to our guest author. Dr. Marshaun Hymon wrote chapter 3 in our book, and it's on diversity in your organization's DNA. Alex, what did we talk about today with Dr. Hymon?
Yeah, so we sort of unpacked the chapter a little bit. We didn't want to give the whole thing away, but there's just so many really critical elements about surrounding the way that we can embed diversity, equity, inclusion, and access into our organizations. What we talked about a lot is sort of the juxtaposition of the chapter between the organization application, sort of like that whole big picture organizational administration, but also how poignant everything is for the individual. It's not just an organizational help chapter. It is definitely, there's a lot of opportunities for introspection. And Marshaun talks a lot about how, the first step in our diversity journey is to pause and self-reflect. And he gives us a lot of opportunities in the chapter to do it in an inviting way. The way that he presents these topics is so masterful. I say that word masterful so many times, but it truly is because it's so accessible. You don't leave with a bad taste in your mouth about these sensitive topics. You feel very a part of the conversation. And that's just a testament to Marshaun's work, just as an exceptional human, but also in his work with True Change Alliance and all the diversity consulting that he does. He's a real asset to our field and an incredible contributor to this book.
I really can't wait for you to hear Marshaun talk about his chapter. It was a blast asking questions and going back over it face to face and not in a Google document. So this episode is brought to you by our friends at Kaleidoscope Adventures and the Kinnison Choral Company. But without further ado, this special episode on the business of choir and our guest author, Dr. Marshaun Hymon, Diversity in Your Organization's DNA. Today on the Music Ed Matters podcast, I'm joined by co-host Alex Gardner and today's guest, author of Chapter 3 in the Business of Choir, a wonderful human you've heard from before, Dr. Marshaun Hymon. Hello, Dr. Hymon.
Hello, Emmy. Hey, Alex. Really nice to be here with y'all. I appreciate it.
It's really great to see the three of us in one place. I mean, even though it's a Zoom, it's been so many great conversations via text and Zoom and phone call, getting this book together. And Marshaun, your chapter, I would literally buy the book just for your chapter.
Oh, please. Thank you. I appreciate
dynamite.
It is dynamite. Now, I know you've been on the show a couple of times. Let's just start from the beginning. Can you give us a super quick, who is Dr. Marshaun Hymon?
Of course, yeah. So, hey, everyone. You probably met me, but my name is Dr. Marshaun Hymon. I am an educator. I'm a consultant. I'm a diversity leader. I specialize in diversity consulting. And I'm the co-founder of a consulting firm called True Change Alliance. We are based in Florida, but we work with companies all over the country. So excited to be here and excited to talk with you all today.
Tell us a little bit more about True Change Alliance.
Yeah. So TCA, we are based in Florida, as I mentioned, and two of my colleagues, Jory Spencer and Justin Stevens, we work together and we offer 3 services for our clients. First, we offer training and learning design. This is where we will train school districts or corporate organizations or private companies about unconscious bias and anti-racism and gender dynamics in the workplace and ensuring that we are understanding how that surfaces in our workplaces. We also do cultural development work, and we help folks understand the strategy that they need to build around diversity, equity, and inclusion in their organizations. What do you do? What are your next steps after you learn? And then we also offer coaching services. So you've learned, you've developed a strategy and an action plan, and we help you actually implement and move that forward as well. So again, I think this is a really exciting work and really important for us to be thinking about today. So, and I enjoy doing it so much.
And I think we're all really lucky too, Marshaun. Like Emmy said, you contributed the third chapter of the book that The Business of Choir, called Diversity in Your Organization's DNA. And that, I feel like Emmy said, it's worthy to stand alone as a reason to buy the book. It is just chock full of all that kind of stuff that you just said that True Change Alliance does. And there's so many really incredible elements in this chapter that help, that can truly help an organization who's really committed or is wanting to ignite a commitment to focus and center diversity, equity, inclusion, and access in their organization. And so I wonder if you could just give us a little bit of a teaser, like kind of what was going through your mind as you were trying to structure the content of this chapter, knowing what our audience for this book was. Kind of what were your thoughts behind that?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Alex. So as I started kind of thinking about what I wanted to write, how I wanted to structure it, as I mentioned a minute ago, I think the importance of understanding the unconscious brain is the very first step. And then what do you do about that, right? So I started with some unconscious bias research, just a page or so, but to kind of explain how our unconscious brain works and the impact on people in our country. I then took a moment to differentiate politics and DEI. So often, especially where I am in Florida, it's a really political landscape right now. So I wanted to directly talk about how politics and DEI differentiate and why we should be focused on bringing DEI in our organizations. I then moved into kind of what we're calling the DEIA Toolkit. And there are a few different tools that leaders and organizations need to be able to harness as they kind of embed diversity into their organization. And then we ended the chapter with the importance of building a culture of inclusion and the type of leaders that are important for that and how we build cultures of inclusion in our organizations. So that kind of what was in my head and how we structured the chapter.
And it is masterfully structured, I will add. What I really enjoy about your chapter is kind of how it opens. A lot of these conversations, unfortunately, around DEIA can get very polarizing and get very charged. And you address some of the big elephants in the room right off the bat in such a really accessible way. It's not offensive. It really kind of makes people pause and think a little bit before they take up their torch and pitchforks. You talk about, you've already mentioned unconscious bias, and you also unpack the concept of tokenism. Could you explain a little bit? I know we're not trying to give away the chapter altogether, but you have this really great opening analogy that I think a lot of choir directors have faced in the past about teaching traditionally Black music. Could you kind of unpack that for us a little bit?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So to your point, to not give away the chapter or the analogy, I'll kind of give a brief summary, but begin the chapter by saying, imagine that you're a choir director, you're auditioning for a gospel song or a spiritual. You have a variety of different folks that are finalists for this particular solo, and then you end up choosing the Black soloist, right? And we probably expect that the audience probably won't hesitate when they see that person, but so often we go directly to the Black person to sing that solo, as opposed to thinking about what's the other opportunities for that Black soloist, right? Can I support another person from another group to learn the vowels and the tone and the structure to perform gospel music and spirituals more authentically? And what do I show my audience? Can I show my audience a different way of performing and experiencing gospel music? So we begin that way with the analogy because I think it's important how that impacts everything else that we do, what folks are saying, what our students are experiencing, and then how I'm showing up in that space as well as a leader.
Yeah, I think that's really incredible. Like I said, that's just I know I've experienced that in my work as a white educator, when we're working with gospel music, spirituals, that kind of stuff, just trying to find that line where we can provide incredible education for all of our students across cultural barriers without kind of tokenizing those culture barriers that are in the room. And I think moving forward into the chapter, that's where your DEIA toolkit really shines. There's 5 sections, 5 tools that you mention. Do you want to summarize those real fast? Or do you want me to summarize them real fast? I'm looking at it right now. I know it's been a while since you read it.
I love. Maybe you want to quickly run through, and I can.
I will run through it. There are 5 tools in this DEIA toolkit. They are intentional recruitment, performance for transformation, facilitation, re-railing, and program evaluation. And, I don't know how you all, the listener, feel, but when I first saw that toolkit, I was like, that wasn't what I kind of expected to find in a DEIA toolkit. We were talking before we were recording that so many leaders kind of want the quick fix. I mean, you said like everybody wants that quick fix, and DEIA is not a quick one-stop shop and everything's magically transformed. And that's really where the DEIA toolkit shines. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So as I was thinking about the essential tools that a leader might need to embed DEI in an organization, there's a framework that I offer later in the chapter that juxtaposes policy and practice with behaviors, and both of those are important to be an effective leader. So some of the tools are about what an organization might do. For example, evaluating your program, understanding the representation within your organization. How many of each group do you have? How do you recruit more effectively? And then there are behaviors that a leader must display. So how are you facilitating conversation? How are you asking the appropriate questions? How are you modeling appropriate behaviors that are authentic for different groups of people in your organization? I think both are important to be effective. So as you mentioned, it might not be a typical toolkit that you see, but it infuses both policy practice and behaviors for leaders.
I like that use of policy, practice, and behaviors. I feel like I am the luckiest person in the world because Marshaun serves on the board of our nonprofit called Rise Outreach. That's a whole nother conversation. But during our board retreat this past June, you came in and did this fantastic team building work session. And the ripple effect of what we learned in that work session, not only did I get to see the chapter in action, which was absolutely breathtaking from someone who had read it so many times, but to see what that's now doing for our organization, that has been absolutely incredible. But also to see you modeling some of these tactics, re-railing when we would get derailed, or not just refocusing, but going back to the heart, to the title. We're looking at this through your organization's DNA.
So when I think about embedding diversity within an organization, I think it's more about impacting the people who are moving the organization forward holistically. So in the chapter, I talk about the importance of building partnerships with organizations, right? So we can authentically recruit for our organization and build sustainable pipelines. I talk about the importance of leaders understanding themselves, right? How they experience advantage or disadvantage in our society. In the facilitation section, I talk about the importance of influencing others and helping them see themselves so that we as people are shifting and changing, our mindsets are growing. So that way, then the organization moves forward as well. So it's less, and I mentioned this a minute ago, but it's more about policy and practice. It's also about the people, their thoughts, their behaviors, their perceptions that they bring, and how we move forward together. So that's kind of what's on my mind.
That's beautifully said. I love that. I'll make sure I make that a quote card because that's exactly, I think, one of the most eloquent summaries.
Marshaun, one of my favorite tools in this toolkit is the re-railing tool. I know you've already mentioned it a little bit. And I feel like a lot of times, at least in my work, people are hesitant to get into conversations about the DEIA for fear of the reaction from other people, and sort of how that fear of confrontation and that discomfort that people sometimes have a hard time grappling with really prevents DEIA from taking root in an organization. And this re-railing tactic, I think, is really excellent. In the chapter, you talk about 3 sort of default responses that some people who exhibit this sort of discomfort often say. The biggest one for me, that I've heard it from even people in my own organization, is, I don't see color. And I think you just so masterfully unpack these sort of, these frankly incorrect mindsets. Could you explain a bit more in depth about kind of what re-railing is? Yeah,
absolutely. So when we think about re-railing, it is the ability to move a conversation back onto the rails, right? So sometimes we might be discussing a sensitive topic and someone will raise a concern that will derail the conversation, right? So as someone that has the ability to re-rail means that they're actually listening for the conversation at hand, and they are also listening for the comment that takes us off the rails, right? So to your point, this idea of I don't see color, right? This person is typically usually saying that I'm not racist, right? That I see everyone as the same, right? And that I want to treat everyone the same. And the goal is actually not that, right? Actually seeing color helps us understand the person's experience. It helps us understand how they move through the world and actually helps us treat them the way they need to be treated to be successful in our organizations, in our world, right? So that was an example of me rerailing the conversation to explain why that comment may not have been so great, right? And then moving us forward with the conversation at hand.
Yeah, and you allude to one of the really, I say the word masterful because it truly is, just the masterful things about this chapter. We've talked about sort of how the chapter applies to an organization and at the organizational level, but there's so many elements that also apply to the individual. And you end towards the end of the chapter. There's another whole chapter on leadership in this book, but you offer a really interesting introspection for the choral leader at the end. Sort of, you talk about 4 different archetypes of choral leaders, of organizational leaders, excuse me. What kind of qualities are you alluding to when you talk about those 4 types?
Yeah, so I think I may have mentioned this a little bit before, but I think there are 2 distinct qualities that are required in a leader, which is articulating your beliefs and modeling behaviors in an organization, but then also implementing the policies that underpin those expected behaviors of the participants in your organization. And I say participants, that's staff members, those are volunteers, those are students and participants and singers in your organization. And both of those must be present. And to give a small teaser, I think if you do both of those with high quality, that type of leader is what we call a disruptor, right? You are someone who is truly pushing for DEI. You're understanding the impact on people and communities. You are speaking about it, and you're implementing the policies that support what we believe within this organization. So that's kind of a teaser for you all.
Disruptor to me, when I first read it, I'm like, wait, is that good or bad? Is that a good or bad thing? But as you've explained, we need to be disruptors in order to create the space where all of our singers can be seen, and we can productively and appropriately infuse diversity into our DNA.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's disrupting for the good of all people, right? We are disrupting to ensure that every person in our organization has the ability to thrive, to participate, and move forward in their lives, whether that be in music or not, right? But we're disrupting for good.
So, Marshaun, we've been putting you on the spot with all these questions. I'm going to put you on the spot, but I think this is a soft one.
Okay, cool.
We've talked a lot about our favorite moments of this chapter, our favorite elements. I mean, you've obviously spent so much time with it. You wrote it. We spent a lot of time with it, just reading it over and over again. What's your favorite element of this chapter?
So I'll give 2 answers. I think first, we just talked about the leadership archetypes. I think that was really fun to think about. Like, how do we help folks identify where they might fall on this leadership spectrum, and then what they can do to move forward? So that was fun, and I think one of my favorites. I think the second is there's an analogy that I begin when I talk about a culture of inclusion. Here's a teaser for you. I won't tell you what that analogy is, but it was a true analogy and something that I did as I was writing the chapter. And it was really fun to think about how I myself have biases, right? And I show up in a way that also can be detrimental to folks in organizations, right? So me thinking about myself, being vulnerable with you all, and then kind of presenting an analogy to help you move forward was very fun, and I enjoyed that.
It may or may not involve brownies and perhaps
yes.
Sweet potatoes, an odd combination of and
bananas.
It's been so cool to watch it all unfold and watch the chapter progress throughout the editing stage. But in this is episode 118 we're recording. In episode 117, I talked to Dr. Greg Lefise, and it's all about transfers. And I think what you're pointing at is this fun analogy of the experience you had with the sweet potatoes and how that transfers to helping understand and see a pathway forward in working on diversity and working on yourself and working on your organization, and just those are transfers, relating something to something else so that you can learn and grow and proceed. What do you think, someone who's listening now, what do you think is the future that you dream of? If you could dream a future, what would that look like?
I dream a future where everyone, and in this context, every leader is fully self-aware. You understand how you're received and perceived. You're able to adjust your behavior authentically to support others in receiving you in a way that's positive. You're comfortable talking about your race and your ethnicity, and you're knowledgeable of your background, and you're able to share that with others. And then the folks that we're serving are also self-aware. They're aware of their race, their ethnicity, their backgrounds, and they're comfortable sharing that with everyone in the organization. And I think with that, we create a space where there's authenticity, there's vulnerability. And when all those scales and everything is peeled away, that's where the true beauty comes out, where we can make music, we can build relationships, and actually have a world that's equal, right, and fair. And I think music and musicians and conductors have such an amazing opportunity to push this forward even faster, because music is one way that we experience emotion, and we can communicate that which can't be communicated. So I would charge you all to take this seriously and begin to work on yourself, and then your
Speaking
organization.
of that, you said there's such opportunity abundant here. For the listener who is perhaps acknowledging for one of their first times that they might need to focus on DEIA a little bit more, what's the first step? You kind of said it, I think, but what's that first step of that person who is kind of looking up that hill and saying, oh my gosh, how am I going to get there? What's that first little step that's going to get them moving forward?
Yeah, the first step is self-reflection. So before you take a step, actually pause and think about, in this society, how do I experience advantage, right? When I walk into a store, am I followed, right? When I look at the representatives of my local district, of my representatives of my country, do I see people that look like me? Do I see people of my gender, right? When I want to take leave from work as a parent, am I expected to take multiple months off, or am I expected to take a week off, stay with the baby, and then get back to work, right? There are so many different ways that different genders, ethnicities, sexual orientations, where you come from, other countries, we experience the world differently. So the very first step is to figure out how you experience the world. So that way, when you encounter someone else that experiences it differently, there's a good conversation there, as opposed to impacting someone's ability to move through the world because you're unaware of how you experience it.
So the first step is actually not taking a step at all.
The first step is not to take a step. It's to pause.
I love that.
and reflecting. Cool.
This has been so great. Thank you for your time. Thank you for writing this chapter. I will never feel like I can thank you enough for being a guest author in this project and being such a supportive colleague and friend and such an intelligent piece of this puzzle. Because I don't think that you can do anything if you haven't taken a fine-tooth comb to your organization's DNA and ensured that it looks like the community around you and it is diverse in every possible way. So thank you for your work with that.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
I always let the guest say one thing that really matters. We know self-reflection before action, but is there anything else you really want the listeners to know before we sign off today?
I would say get a diverse circle. I think it's important that you are with people that are different than you, that look different than you, that come from different places than where you come from, that eat the different food that you eat. But get a diverse circle as you reflect and understand your own experience in the world. having a diverse circle will support and help your growth exponentially. So that's what I would say.
I'm so glad you're part of our circle. It's an honor to know you, my friend.
Thank you so much. Honor to know both of you.
Thanks, Marshaun. Marshaun is so correct in all that he is saying. You know, those of us who are trying to continue on our ADEI journey, our diversity journey, you know, it sometimes feels like a really uphill battle. But like he said, the very first thing to do before you even take that first step is to pause and look at yourself and think about how you interact and benefit from the world around us. And that is just such a crucial and important thing, that self-awareness. That's the first step in really embedding diversity into your organization's DNA.
It's the perfect place to start. That's just one little thing you can do every day. And at the start of the school year, at the start of the choir season, when this episode's coming out, what a perfect thing to reflect and spend time on yourself while you're hustling and bustling and getting all the routines and the music and everything else that goes into those first few weeks of school or rehearsals. This is such a great reminder that pause, start inside, and then it's a long-term journey to infuse diversity into your DNA. And we're all doing it together. That's the best part.
Absolutely. And this isn't the end of this conversation by any means. You know, we want all of our readers of the business of choir to continue on in this conversation. In addition to the book website, giamusic.com, we also have our own book website called businessofchoir.com. There's links to buy the book there. We have a lot of resources up there. All the resources that are included in the book are linked there. We're developing this, but we want to create a community where these types of conversations can continue. So we hope you'll join us there and buy the book.
Yeah. You can also join the conversation over at Patreon. We created a very special Business of Choir tier over at patreon.com/musicedmatters. You'll get all the bonus episodes that come from the Music Ed Matters podcast, all of the meetups, but then you'll get exclusive book content as things come out, as we update, as we go forward, as we present. Alex and I will be working to just give special bonus content to that community over there, because building a really successful business, being able to get grants and funding and build your capacity and tell your story and impact more lives, it starts with a strong foundation, a business foundation. It's how you sustain organizational growth successfully. So thank you for getting excited about this book with us. It's been so much fun. You know, we all know that you matter, my friend. That's the most important thing. You matter, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing. We all know music matters, especially infusing diversity into our organizations and into our choirs and into ourselves. And I'll see you next time, maybe Alex will too, on the Music Ed Matters podcast.
Bye, y'all.